So I'm going to be talking about mathematical operators in this video, and you're probably used to mathematical operators because you use them all the time. Mathematical operators are things like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So, traditionally when I'm learning new programming languages, I always tend to skip the lessons on mathematical operators because they're kind of boring and I already know them. However, I would suggest that you stick through these videos, a couple of them, because the math operators in Java don't work the way you might expect them to, especially division. And I will talk more about that, division, and really the concept of promotion in a later video. So, just for right now, I'm going to briefly go over all the operators and one more that you probably haven't heard of, right? So let's get started. First, we need to understand what an expression is. An expression is something like this, right? 2 plus 2, this is an expression. We have an operator and some operands. So we know that the operands are basically the 2's, and of course the operator is the plus symbol. And the way the plus symbol works as an operator is that it's going to add two operands, two numerical operands together, and it's going to evaluate to some sum, right? In this case, the sum is 4. So we can store the value of an expression into a variable. So if I said something like in sum is equal to 2 plus 2, right? What would the value of sum be? Well, it would be 4, right? And I can prove it to you by printing out the value or printing out sum, right? So if I go and I compile and run my main.java file, I must have not saved this. Oh, I also forgot a semicolon. It's a rookie mistake. The value is 4, right? So we can store, again, expressions or the value of expressions into a variable, or we can just run the expression like that when we're printing it out, right? So if we do the same thing, again, it works exactly the same. Okay, so obviously this is an example of addition, right? So let's look at another one. So we say int, this is short for difference. We say 5 minus 2, right? This is an example of subtraction. Int prod, or short for product, is times 3. This is an example of multiplication. And then lastly is the quotient, and this is an example of division. And I'm going to be careful with this one. I'm going to make sure that the operands need to be numbers that can divide evenly. So I'm going to use 18 divided by 6, right, which will be 3. So this is division, right? And I can prove this to you. So if I were to, but these also indeed work. If I were to print out the quotient, right, we get 3, right? So again, basically the same example as before when I was showing you addition. Now, there's one extra operator that you probably haven't heard of, and it's called the modulus operator. So if the addition operator returns a sum, the subtraction operator returns a difference, multiplication returns a product, division returns a quotient, what does the modulus operator return? It returns the remainder, right? So if I say something like, okay, int remainder is equal to 13 mod 6, what is this going to evaluate to? Well, let's see. The answer is 1. So why 1? Well, how many times does 6 go into 13? It can go into it twice, fully, right? Remember, we're not trying to get any fractions here. We're talking about full numbers. It can go into it twice, right? If we went into it 3 times, we'd have 18. 18 is larger than 13. It can go into it twice, right? 12. That leaves a remainder of 1, because 13 minus 12 is 1. That's why we got 1, right? Okay, so the modulus operator actually can be a pretty nifty operator to use in certain circumstances, right? If you don't need it, it's not all that useful, but you might actually end up using it, or you could use it in certain scenarios, and it could really, really help you out, and it can be pretty useful when you need it. Okay, but I will talk a lot more about some of these modulus tips that you can use much later once we understand the concept of loops. Because most of the time, whenever you really use modulus to run some pretty quirky calculations, you're probably dealing with a loop. So we'll talk more about that later. But in the meantime, that is basically it for the mathematical operators. So in the next video, we're going to be talking about integer division. Now, it is extremely important that you learn this, because if you don't, some of your calculations are going to be wrong, and it's going to be extremely frustrating, and you're not going to know what's going wrong. So the next video will ensure that you don't ever run into those sorts of problems.